General Rosecrans, now in charge of all federal forces in Western Virginia after Major General McClellan was called to Washington, gathered his forces, and proceeded south. Lee followed in an attempt to block Rosecrans from moving east towards Lewisburg. The two forces were approximately the same size, and each force occupied separate ridges at Sewell Mountain. Both sides hoped the other would attack and be destroyed. Neither side had an advantage of position, so they sat on the two separate ridges and bombarded one another with cannons, but did little harm to each other. Persistent rains, sicknesses, and low supplies plagued both sides, who had already overextended their supply lines. Rosecrans finally realized they were at a stalemate and reasoned that if he pulled out, he would not only save his men, he would shorten his supply lines. Lee, if he followed, would have to lengthen his supply lines. Rosecrans departed one night under the cover of darkness. When Lee realized Rosecrans was gone, he also realized he had already extended his line of supplies to the breaking point. So Lee decided not to pursue Rosecrans and sent the Confederate forces under Loring back to Huntersville. No further serious offensive actions were mounted by the Confederates to retake the area of Western Virginia. Lee withdrew the remaining Confederate forces to Lewisburg, where he received a telegram from President Davis recalling him to Richmond. A dejected Lee finally left the eastern Virginia mountains on October 30th and returned to Richmond. The Southern press was particularly hard on Lee, as you see here with the quotes. Perhaps the deepest cut of all was from the Richmond paper that labeled him Granny Lee. Western Virginians approved the ordinance to create a new state out of Virginia by a vote of 18,408 to 781. With the recall of General Lee from Western Virginia, General Kelly took temporary command of the newly formed U.S. Military Department of Cumberland, established to guard the P&O Railroad. General Kelly was an aggressive commander. He soon built up his forces, then attacked and defeated the Confederate forces in Romney. Kelly's force occupied the town. My book, Storm Coming, ends at the end of 1861. The second volume of the trilogy will cover the years of 1862 and 63. Obviously, the battle to create a new state didn't end in 1861. This slide provides a brief summary of the events leading up to the statehood. The most serious block to statehood took place in the U.S. Senate in the debate that lasted from June 26 to July 14, 1862. The Senate did pass the bill by a vote of 23 to 17, and the bill was sent to the President. The President hesitated until the last minute before signing the bill. He finally decided, saying, "We can scarcely dispense with the aid of West Virginia in this struggle, much less can we afford to have her against us in Congress and in the field. Her brave and good men regard her admission into the Union as a matter of life and death. They have been true to the Union under many severe trials. The division of a state is a dreaded as a precedent, but a measure made expedient by war is no precedent for times of peace. It is said that admission of West Virginia is secession and tolerated only because it is our secession. Well, if we can call it by that name, there is still a difference enough between secession against the Constitution and secession in favor of the Constitution. The admittance of West Virginia to the Union represented a personal blow to Lee, Letcher, Davis, as well as the Confederacy. Virginia lost over a third of her territory, the only state to lose any territory during the Civil War. Perhaps all concerned realized the wily northwestern Virginia politicians had taken advantage of the chaos of war to do what they had always wanted to do for decades: secede from Virginia. Lincoln, in his speech approving the West Virginia statehood bill, said, "The division of a state is dreaded as a precedent." Was West Virginia statehood a precedent? Following the same process set forth in the U.S. Constitution, Massachusetts passed an enabling legislation in 1819, separating the District of Maine from the rest of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Maine became the nation's 23rd state on March 15, 1820. Over the years, many have questioned the legality of the formation of the state of West Virginia. The fact that the state still stands and yesterday celebrated its 155th year birthday is proof in itself that it was formed legally. The Supreme Court of the United States did rule in 1871 in the case of Virginia versus West Virginia, in which Virginia was suing West Virginia over the ownership of Berkeley and Jefferson counties. The court implicitly affirmed that the breakaway Virginia counties had received the necessary consent of both the state of Virginia and the United States Congress to become a separate state, and explicitly held that the counties of Berkeley and Jefferson were part of the new state of West Virginia.